Hi, I'm Bob Gimlin, and I have a nasty cold flu thing going on. I wanted to wait until my symptoms disappeared before recording a new video, but it's been 2 weeks with no end in sight, so we'll just have to deal with it. Anyhow, this is Ray Wallace, admitted hoaxer, prankster, and all-around larger-than-life character. And though he may have been larger than life, he died in November of 2002. He owned a construction company in Northern California. In the year 1958, he began stomping around with crude wooden foot-shaped stamps on his construction sites. The stamps were made by this gentleman named Rant Mullins. Jerry Crew was a Caterpillar operator employed by Wallace. Crew made a cast of one of the impressions. This apparently was big news in 1958, because Crew and his cast made the front page of the newspaper. And this is technically where we get the term Bigfoot. What most people don't know is that locals in the immediate area suspected that Wallace was behind this. A county sheriff even publicly accused Wallace of hoaxery. So I recognize that the events at Wallace's excavation need to be excluded from the actual Bigfoot knowledge sphere. That being said, there are some aspects of Wallace's incident that I find curious. Ed Patrick, a member of the construction crew, and seen in this photo on the far left, had ignored the prints and thought the whole thing was nonsense because he thought his boss, Ray Wallace, was demented. One day, Bob Titmus, a local taxidermist, tracker, and generally competent person, came to the site to see the tracks for himself. There were fresh ones. Ed Patrick, no doubt curious, accompanied Titmus on a little tracking expedition. Patrick and Titmus found a trail, several miles long, through a steep and resistant path. The two men came upon yards of coiled 3x16-inch steel-braided wire, weighing well in excess of 100 pounds, at a location with dense enough brush that the two men could not continue past where the wire was dropped. Recoiled. Patrick was disturbed by this find. Perhaps he found it curious. He knew Ray Wallace well. He did not think Wallace would carry so many pounds of steel up a sharp incline in rough terrain. But more disturbingly is that he did not think Wallace would be able to move the steel, particularly in wooden shoes, as were the only visible tracks leading to or away from the steel, which continued into terrain that neither Titmus or Patrick could follow. And Titmus was a tracker. He remained active in the Bigfoot phenomena for the rest of his life. I don't think he would have, unless he found something that he found quite compelling. And as for Patrick, his stance went from, my boss is an idiot, to, okay, something is happening here. From what I can gather, the construction crew as a whole was torn on the matter of hoax or not. Allegedly, heavy equipment would be moved at night, like 50-gallon drums of diesel fuel, and a 700-pound tire was found flipped one morning. But to be totally clear, the crew had no doubt that their boss, Ray Wallace, was messing around with stamps like these. But many wondered just how oil drums could be moved, not dragged, and how heavy tires could be flipped with no trace of equipment, just large footprints that fluctuated in depth, indicating that the track maker actually was bearing the weight of heavy items, which is curious. But again, we know Wallace had foot stamps. He and his family contributed to hoaxery throughout their whole lives. He even had a Bigfoot suit that his wife often wore for films that he would then sell. So there is no doubt that he was using foot stamps. But I assert that Wallace did not begin the tracks. He clumsily attempted to continue them. I think he was inspired by the publicity that the initial track find began. And I can't really prove it. But I can prove that it is curious. As is well researched and documented in Dr. Meldrum's book, Sasquatch, Legend Meets Science, the Wallaces released their toys. All of them. Which made perfect little prints like this. But not one of them matches Jerry Crew's initial track find. not one. This is a side-by-side of the print Wallace claims, quote, started it all, and the very first track that was casted. They are clearly not a match, though according to Wallace they should be. The track Jerry Crew found measured just over 16 inches in length, and there is no indication of drag of the foot to elongate it, which would be obvious. None of Wallace's stamps were 16 inches. They simply don't match. Is it possible that Wallace used a different stamp that he never released? Yes, it's possible, but it seems unlikely, seeing as his main objective seemed to be to take credit for the whole Bigfoot myth. The fact that Wallace never released a stamp that matches the initial casts is curious. Of course, as presented by Loren Coleman, many prints did match Wallace's stamps. The foot in the middle is the stamp that Wallace claims started it all. The cast to the right is likely a cast of a print made by Wallace's stamp. And Wallace claimed that the same stamp, the stamp in the middle, made Jerry Crew's initial cast on the left, which it didn't. See, skeptics love to point out that Ray Wallace started the Bigfoot phenomena in 1958. The Wallaces seem to enjoy this claim, and after Ray Wallace's death in 2002, his son publicly said, quote, Ray Wallace was Bigfoot, and Bigfoot just died. Skeptics, and the public at large, bought into this ridiculousness. Let's examine that. South Dakota, 1889, a hunter reported that a monster, which walked erect like a man, hairy all over, and its mouth was in the chin, stole the hunter's deer carcass. That night, he claimed to hear Yahoo, Yahoo, Yahoo about a mile distant. And that was reported in the Dunkirk Observer, July 16, 1889. 1946, Pennsylvania, a farmer shot a, quote, tall, hairy, man-like creature feeding on a dead cow. That was documented by author Rick Barry. The Hudson Bay, 1811, a surveyor named David Thompson spotted 14 by 8 inch tracks with 3 or 4 inch long toes and short nails, the ball of the foot pressing into the dirt through 6 inches of snow. He and his party had no intentions of tracking it. Quote, for what could the balls of our fowling guns do against such an animal? He could only speculate that it was a, quote, very large bear with worn-away claws, which doesn't happen. This was recorded in his personal journals from January 7th, 1811, as they were donated to the Oregon Historical Quarterly, Volume 15. And these are just the first reports that came to mind that are well beyond the Wallace's timeline and range. So for any skeptic who still claims that Ray Wallace is behind the, quote, Bigfoot myth, there's also this, and all the traditional and oral culture that accompanies it. But sadly, that has mostly been lost. And yet, the public at large is really quite naive enough to think that this man started the Bigfoot legend with these in 1958. Ray Wallace didn't start any legend. He perhaps attempted to clumsily expand upon one, but the father of Bigfoot, Ray Wallace, is not. Any person claiming credit to Sasquatch is like any given person taking credit for UFOs. Real or not, even if you manage to somehow pull off a hoax or two, the real story is far too pervasive, regionally and chronologically, for any one person to take credit. Even if Bigfoot were to be a hoax, or a mass delusion, or something asinine like that, Ray Wallace is not the creator. So is Ray Wallace responsible for Bigfoot? Well, kind of, actually. Footprints on his construction sites technically coined the name Bigfoot, but obviously, the term Sasquatch well predated any creation of Ray Wallace. Much like how the first person to write the word bear in a field guide was certainly not the first person to encounter a bear, which makes sense to me. Ray Wallace was a prankster. He loved attention. So when this made the paper, of course he ran with it, because the fact remains that when he and his family proudly released their toys, not one of them matched the initial tracks found on his Northern California construction site. He was continuing something that already happened. He was practicing mimicry, not innovation. Ray Wallace neatly fits into the skeptic's cookie-cutter worldview. They say, here is a man with fake feet who claims to have stomped all around the Pacific Northwest. Case closed. But the fact remains that some of his crew, on the construction site itself, were not so sure. And even more damning to Wallace's claims, the fact remains that he never released a stamp that fit the initial track find on his property. Sightings and reports of encounters with an unknown North American primate long predate Wallace, or any Westerner for that matter. And they continued after his death. To claim that Bigfoot is a result of hoaxes, liars, or some kind of mass delusion is ignorant and very naive. And as a note regarding what we are up against in trying to prove or even understand these creatures, this is what a primatologist looked like in 1957 in Africa, and then in the late 60s. Diane Fossey and Jane Goodall did not have to deal with people like this. And while I'm at it, is it any wonder why a primate with a much higher intelligence would stay far away from us? In summation, because Wallace is an admitted hoaxer, we need to strike his account from the official record, because it is contaminated. But off the record, he never released how he made the initial tracks, though he claimed to, and his crew simply was not so sure that he was behind it all. And trying to take credit for the Bigfoot phenomena is simply absurd, especially in the 1950s. And that is my take on the Wallace case. I have every intention to continue and expand my small but proud channel, but I can't do it alone. So please, like and subscribe, share any of my videos to any groups or friends you may be fortunate enough to have, and as always, thanks an awful lot for listening.